Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of Echoes from the Field. And today I'm delighted to welcome Chris Einchcomb. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Yeah, looking forward to talking. Why don't we start off? A lot of people will know you already, but some of the audience might not. So why not introduce yourself to the audience and maybe give a quick summary of your career to date as well?
Well, I've had 40 plus years of experience in the oil and gas industry, mainly in exploration for BP. I ended my upstream career in Russia, working for BP joint ventures, but also had the opportunity at that time to run a land seismic company for 3 years, which was a very interesting experience and a diversion within my career. I've effectively been, therefore, both a provider of seismic data and an end user of seismic data. So therefore, I have a pretty good understanding of the challenges of acquisition and the needs of clients.
Yeah, it's nice. You'll be able to give that dual perspective of what's important to an acquisition contractor and what's important to the end operator. So maybe we'll start with your involvement in STRYDE. And actually that began in, I think it was early 2016. Do you agree?
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
when I was in Rosneft and Bob Dudley approached me and said, I've got this great new technology and would Rosneft like to jointly collaborate with it?
Yeah, and it was a nice time for you and I. So obviously we didn't know each other from our BP days. We met and kind of representing two operators working on developing the same technology with part of SLB, Western GECO at the time. And then later I was delighted when we set up STRYDE in late 2019, you agreed to come and help us as an advisor. So thank you for that. So you've had, if I do the maths quickly, 9 years of STRYDE involvement, or STRYDE and its precursor. I guess my first question is, when in that period did you know it could be a game changer for land seismic? When did you first go, this could work?
Yeah, well, it's been a long time, Mike, and it's been an enjoyable time. I think for me, it was when we all went down to the Middle East I think it was late 2000s, and we did the first, what I would consider as the big comparison test of the STRYDE sensor against cable systems and other single sensor systems in the desert of the UAE. I can remember sitting in the conference room and seeing the results come out. And for me, that showed exactly what we wanted from the STRYDE node, which was a very comparable sensor. So it showed that we were able to get data and record data very effectively. I think for me, that showed that the technology was working. And the key thing was really to take that forward and show how it could benefit operators in the field and lead to better quality data for the end user.
Yeah, there was the data side. These are my recollections. There was the data side, but then something which sticks with me was at the end of that test, we wanted to do a comparison, show the scale of kit involved. And actually the STRYDE or Cheetah kit it was then was packed up and on its way back before the other systems were even assembled for this side-by-side photo. So yeah, that kind of gave a glimpse into the operational benefits as well. But rather than me talking about benefits of STRYDE, what's your view? What impact has STRYDE had on land seismic? And I guess through STRYDE as well as oil and gas, you've helped in other industries. So maybe from both the operator and the acquisition contract perspective, what difference does STRYDE make?
Well, I think for the operator, it's simple. And I think that came from our first real big winter test, which we did in West Siberia for Rosneft. And we did that as a comparison against a standard cable system. And we saw that STRYDE gave us really good quality data through its higher density, through its operational efficiencies. And we actually began to see a lot more visualization of the subsurface and be able to do a lot more in terms of quantitative geophysics. And so that, for me, was very simple from an operator point of view. It was the significant improvement in data quality. I think from a contractor point of view, there are numerous benefits, probably more than in some ways for the operators. And they are the very broad series of aspects from HSE, flexible survey design, greater efficiency in the field, less people, less infrastructure, and that all sort of like come through in terms of efficiency and costs. So, in some ways, having been a contractor, it's all about money. and how you can save money. And I think what we began to see then, even then, was that STRYDE had the ability to really save contractors time and money.
Okay, maybe we'll go back a step and think about some of the operational challenges you encountered. So whether it was as an exploration manager or when you were running a seismic acquisition contractor, what were the biggest and kind of recurrent challenges you encountered, both in planning and delivering the land seismic survey?
Well, so like for me, especially with land seismic, it was all about volume of equipment. So, if you were operating remotely like we were in Russia, getting equipment there was one of our biggest challenges. You couldn't use helicopters because of the heavy weight of equipment. That means transporting it over long distances. Every time that you came to design a survey, contractors could do lots of things, but if you had a restricted budget and you wanted value for money, there was always a cutback because of the volume of equipment that you had to have. So that meant less density in the data and less offset, less azimuth, all the kind of things that we were striving for. And I remember when I entered into Russia, we were generally using, even for 3Ds, a few thousand, receiver points for surveys because of that restriction. Okay, we did start to improve that later on, but we couldn't get to the kind of level of density that we wanted. I think later on, we began to see a lot of challenges with HSE and the impact that would have. Russia, there was a lot of line preparation, and that became a significant factor both for clients, for their KPIs, but also for contractors from a personal safety point of view. So those were the two biggest, for me, the biggest factors that restricted what we could really do on land seismic.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. Imagine you were back in charge of seismic operations. What would you consider non-negotiable for a land seismic survey? What's most important to you?
Well, having dealt with some very challenging surveys onshore, HSE would always remain high on the list. Both from a personal safety, but also as we began to see, protection of the environment and things like that. So, you can't compromise on that in today's world. I think going on beyond that, cost has always been a constraint, especially onshore. You can always do everything if the costs are there, but we're in a challenging world where everyone wants more value for money, which tends to be, if you're an operator, you want better quality data, but pay less for it. And that always, causes a lot of friction between operators and contractors. I think the other thing that we're beginning to see is that nodal technology is beginning to get us more aligned with what I see as offshore seismic. There were fantastic achievements in offshore seismic where we were able to not just look at the image of seismic, but look at quantitative geophysics. And for that, you needed longer offsets, wider azimuths to be able to do all the kind of special geophysical analysis that almost becomes standard now with seismic. So when we started to go into planning surveys nowadays, you actually want to have more nodes or receiver points on the ground to be able to achieve not just an image of the subsurface, but a data set that allows you to do a lot of quantitative geophysics.
No, that's helpful. And given those points, so HSE, etc., would you say if you were planning a survey now, would nodes be non-negotiable, or can you see environments where you would use cables still?
No, I mean, today, I think because of the flexibility that nodes give you, not only from being able to plan surveys, but also logistics in this field, for me, it's almost, I would put that at the norm. There are certain areas where cables may still be practical, some of the more swampy areas where geophones and marsh phones can be more effective than nodes can at this stage. But we've seen such great advances from those early days, Mike, that it's only round the corner before all of those challenges will be solved as well.
There's a lot of continued innovation in the area, which is nice to see. And I know from conversations in the past, you were once brought in, I think it was a contractor rather than operator, but a contractor who'd had a series of fatalities in a year, which is obviously awful. Reflecting back on that time when you were brought in to fix that and correct things, what contributed to those kind of pretty scary statistics? And And how did you go about altering the safety performance?
When I stepped in, we actually brought in DuPont, who were renowned in HSE management and HSE practice, to come in and have a look over it. And their initial assessment was, every company, including yourselves, has practices, standard procedures, manuals. In my party chief's cabin, there was almost more books than I've got behind me. On HSE safety and how you should plan surveys. The problem was nobody ever read them. Nobody ever communicated how important HSE was, and even down to the individual worker didn't really think solidly about his own personal safety in the. So, I think the lesson for me was it's not about the theoretical side, it's the practical way that you apply these things. And that covered everything from just communication. So talking with people, getting them to understand that bad HSE costs you money, costs you people's lives, costs you reputation, but also looking at, the equipment that we used and how best to manage that equipment, the practice we had in the field. The biggest failing that we had was around tree felling. And we're not talking about, chopping some small oak tree in your back garden. These were big conifers, big trees. People inevitably stood in the wrong place, or something chopped down, knocked another tree and another bit fell off and a person was standing a long way away, or, fell on a piece of equipment or fell on a vehicle. So, we had to step back and just really get people to think about how they saw their own personal safety and make sure that they were standing in the right place, carrying out procedures in the right way, and not trying to cut corners.
And that kind of links back, I think, to what we were talking about earlier. In some ways, the available technology and not many compact nodes were available then meant you had to fell trees. So would modern nodes have helped, do you think?
Oh,
if you
yeah.
go back in time?
This is why, for me, mate, we got Rosneft involved. I mean, I can't remember the statistics anymore, but the amount of tree felling that we had to do, we were still more dense in the receiver lines than we were in shot lines. And it didn't matter whether it was a shot line or receiver line, we still had to cut 6 meters width of line clearance to be able to move the big heavy trucks down the lines to deploy the cable systems. If, as we've seen with nodes, you don't really need to do any cutting, and we proved that in some ways with the winter test that we did in Siberia. But two, even if you have to, it can be much, much lighter. So there's no doubt that moving away from the large volume and heavy cable systems, that it's not just the weight of the cable system, it's all the logistics that have to go with it. If you can get away with that, then you don't have to do all the things that were standard in doing surveys in remote areas.
Yeah, it's the best way to manage a risk, if you like, is to eliminate it. So yeah, it's good that it's not just STRYDE. Nodal technologies in general are helping eliminate some of those risks. My next general topic was survey execution and scaling up. This is a nice trend which I've noticed certainly with the project STRYDE are involved in, but it's something we would have spoken about when you were at Rosneft and I was at BP. We kind of projected that surveys would continue to become possibly larger in area, but definitely denser and probably more complex terrains. And I've certainly seen that myself. So whereas when we started STRYDE, you think of maybe 50,000 channels as a big crew. Now that's renewable industries are using that level of nodes, and oil and gas are in the hundreds of thousands. So as the industry scales up and as people acquire better, denser data, maybe in more complex terrains, what do you think are the key success factors let's think from the operator side, the exploration teams. What are the key success factors they need to prioritize to get high quality results?
Time is money in the industry, and people forget that land seismic is impacted by more than just being able to get in the field. There's inevitably weather windows, whether that was the cold in Siberia, you couldn't operate in the summer, whether it's, in the desert, you don't want to be in too hot weather, whether it's rainy seasons, dry seasons. There's all, it's not a 365-day a year operation like it can be offshore. So the challenges onshore is all about quick planning, quick mobilization, quick efficiency in the field, and the delivery of the results much quicker, because, you could achieve that, but if you do it over 3 years, that delays everything from processing through interpretation through being able to deliver. So, we were always striding in everything that we did in exploration to reduce the timescale. Because if you can get, I was thinking about this the other day, if you can get 1 year's extra early production, it probably pays for all the seismic that you can do in the survey. So, for me, it was always about, can we increase the efficiency? From an operator point of view, that would allow me to do my well planning, drill wells much quicker, get results much quicker, get production much quicker. Efficiency for me has always been one of the biggest factors and drivers in exploration.
Yeah, it's definitely efficiency continues to improve, but you're never done. It can always get more efficient. So it's a good area to focus. And I guess from your perspective, what contributes most to achieving a high resolution or high definition seismic image, and why? So what's most important?
I think nowadays it's finding a balance between receiver and seismic source patterns. Source tends to be more expensive. So we always want to be looking back at that. But in some environments, like the desert, where we can use vibrosize, maybe source is more efficient than receivers. So it's always about finding a balance. But in a lot of the work that we've been doing recently, I think it's much more flexible to get higher density within the receiver domain than it is to get it in the source domain. Source will always be a bit more challenging in terms of its access, in terms of its cost, how much effort you have to put into it. There's less of that within the receivers. You can deploy them in dense patterns. I think I mentioned earlier on, we're now wanting a world where it's not just about density, it's about offset and azimuth to be able to do all the special geophysics. So I think where we're seeing the benefit of nodes now is that ability to deploy large, what I call static grids. We don't have active spreads anymore. We just have large static grids that allow us to shoot more efficiently, but then be able to analyze all the data that we recover and choose what is the best data in some ways, not just necessarily saying we can only have an active spread of X number of nodes and that's all you're going to get in the processing. So it's that, that ability to deploy larger, static, denser grids nowadays that is really driving seismic quality.
Okay. Now going to move on to experiences from the field. I know you've had a lot. What do you see commonly as challenges on seismic surveys? And if it's okay, even things that people don't discuss openly. So what are the common challenges?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I even saw back when I started shooting land seismic in the 80s was access was always a challenge. And access was in some ways a number of factors. It could start with landowners who say, well, I don't want you on my land, or the landowner would say, yeah, you can come on my land, but, pay me more than the cost of the survey to be able to do that. So, landowners for land seismic have always been a challenge, and not only from being able to get it, it was a very costly and timely exercise for us in Russia, just planning a survey. It was easy in West Siberia because not many people own the land. But when you got into the farming areas of Orenburg, you had thousands of landowners you had to go and visit. I think the other thing is the environment, especially now as you start to move to more sensitive areas. Being able to access certain things was constrained, so that was another constraint on access. And the other one, having shot seismic in places like Kurdistan with its steep slopes and things like that, that you should never forget about the geomorphology of land seismic, whether that's rivers, slopes, ridges, all the kind of things that really impact your ability to deploy systems, to be able to shoot data. And so for me, access was always one of the biggest challenges that we faced with land seismic.
Okay, thank you. You didn't mention theft, I don't think, and I raise it just because I've noticed a trend. So STRYDE's always been designed to be buried. A lot of other companies are deliberately designing their systems to sit on the surface. And I guess from your perspective, does that mean those nodes or cables might go walkabout, or has theft not been too big an issue in the surveys you've been involved in?
Well, I mean, now you mentioned it, was actually something that I thought about. And, I think there's two things for not being able to bury equipment. In Orenburg, we always had the irate farmer who would decide to go and plow up the cable system. In Kurdistan, you had people stealing the batteries, stealing cables, not so much interested in the geophones because you couldn't do much with those. But, you'd often find your cables being used for fencing, and obviously the batteries powering radios and things like that. So theft is always there. It's like everything. It can be managed, but it costs, having security on the line and things like that. So I think we saw the ability to be able to bury nodes, reduce that. I wouldn't say it would remove it, because there's always those factors sitting around. If you have a dense grid, the odd theft of it, you're never going to find somebody with 10,000 nodes in their back garden. You would never find somebody with, 60 batteries in their back garden. It was always the one or two. With cable systems, theft became a bigger issue, because if one battery was gone or one bit of cable was gone, it meant a lot of line checking and trying to find where the problem. Nowadays, if one node goes from a very dense grid, then it's not so much of an issue. So theft is a cost, but is it an issue for data quality these days? Probably not so much.
Yeah, I guess as long as you design dense and with redundancy, then yeah, it's less of an issue. Obviously, I'd if I was a contractor or an operator, I want to minimize it. One other topic, which is, I guess, a more modern topic, is nodes have gained prevalence. How important, in your view, is node throughput in the camp? So taking a node from the field, getting the data off, recharging it, getting it ready to put out again, if you're not in a static spread.
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes back to this efficiency point, Mike. The last thing you want is a bottleneck in the camp. So you don't want to be holding up your field operations just because you can't recycle your nodes through the camp and get the data downloaded. So, I think that it is important to have a system that you can do that very quickly, move it through. I think also, as we move away, the whole advantage of the cable system was real-time QC, which for a lot of operators was, almost like their number one requirement. I want to see my data to make sure you're doing the right thing for me. Now, as we move away from that, what you want to be able to do is to be able to get that data off your nodes very quickly, get it analyzed very quickly, begin to show brute stacks very quickly. And I think this is where STRYDE is making some very big steps within the industry to show that even if you go to 1 million nodes, you can create the infrastructure that allows you to rotate nodes very quickly. We've now got the computing power and the software that allows you to analyze that very quickly. And we've got portable processing systems that generate raw results much quicker for the operators. If you can do that all quickly, some of the, the standard practices like real-time QC and what have you disappear. So yeah, very important, Mike, but efficiency is number one for me.
Yeah, I guess it's another form of efficiency, isn't it? As you said, it's allowing the next day's field operations continue, but it's also, if you need, so at STRYDE, you have maybe 4 containers, you can turn around 1 million nodes with a handful of people. If suddenly you need 70 people and 20 containers to turn around the same number of nodes, your camp is bigger, you've got more exposure. It quite quickly becomes a limiting factor on what you can do. Okay, experience with STRYDE. So in your current role, how do you collaborate with the STRYDE team to help clients get the data quality they want while staying within their operational and budget constraints? It's a difficult challenge you face when a client says, I want to achieve this, here's my budget, how do I do it? So how do you go about that?
I think it's just offering my experience, Mike. As I said, I've been both an end user and a provider of seismic. So we're always looking for that balance. I think it's been the ability to work with a number of clients with different needs. You can take some ideas that have come out of one survey and apply it to others that people haven't thought about. And, it's especially with a lot of our non-oil and gas seismic clients, in the mining industry and things like that, where they want, I wouldn't say cheaper surveys, but they want something different. They don't really understand the power of what seismic can deliver, and we can deliver them, everything from very cost-effective 2Ds to pseudo 3Ds to full-blown 3Ds. Because I've been an interpreter all my life, I understand what people are looking for in the subsurface, but also having been a contractor, I can balance that against, you don't just give them everything because they're never going to be able to afford it. Well, taking that into the design and being innovative in design and thinking more a bit the subject that we were talking about before, which is getting the right balance on the receiver density to match what you can achieve with the source density. And, a lot of our clients are still in the world where dynamite is the only applicable source, and dynamite is a very expensive and timely operation. You've got to drill holes, so they take time. So if you can scale up the receiver side and do that in a cost-effective way, it helps clients think, that they can scale back a bit on the source density.
Then a follow-up question: if you look back across all the STRYDE or formerly Cheetah surveys you've worked on, which stands out as the most memorable or transformative, and why?
Yeah, I think the collaboration we did with Newcastle University and RAF leaving with the MOD, for me, it demonstrated the ability of the STRYDE system to be used in a very complex situation in an active base without disturbing any operations. We had some challenges from people who didn't understand it and thought we were going to be detonating explosives and things like that. It was very easy to explain to laymen, what we were doing, and that was fully accepted. And the next thing you know, we can lay nodes all over the place. Very easy to train. Students did it. So, we weren't using experienced contractors, and we did it very, very efficiently. We're not just an oil and gas provider. We are there for any industry that wants to do it, any location, any sensitive location. And for me, there's lots of things I've been involved in, but it was one that was very enjoyable, but also I think gave a lot of benefit to us and to our client.
Yeah, it was, I was in the field for a period then as well. It was fascinating. It's not every day you get to shoot seismic through an active airfield, an active base. So it was good learning experience, but a good end image.
Yeah.
And I love the fact, it showed that for geothermal in the UK, you can get a good data set at a very low price point, which is a must for that to take off.
I think the other thing, Mike, is we and others began to understand that you're not just recording seismic data, you're recording a whole bunch of other things, and that data can be used in a number of ways. And I remember some of the presentations from Newcastle University that were showing, even the noise was showing how people were moving around the base when they were moving around the base. They've started to use the passive side of what you get from a continuous recording node in ways that probably we didn't imagine. So lots of benefits from what was something that was very simple and enjoyable to do.
Yeah, and there's still teams looking at the data now, doing different things, which shows it's one of the joys of working with good universities. As well as the initial results, you get a load more findings in the coming years. So, last topic before we close out, your views on the industry and advice, I guess. So, for operators who are still choosing cable systems over nodal technology, what would you say to them based on your years of experience?
I think it goes back to, in some ways, that first trial that we did, Mike, and what really showed to me why STRYDE technology was going to be successful. A node is a geophone, and a cable system is just a geophone. The issue is how you connect them all up, and why do you connect them all up? So why do you want to use geophone arrays? Why do you want to, in some ways, merge your data in the field? Nodes are just geophones, and you can just record every single data point rather than trying to merge it in the field to get something to come down the line. So for me, just think of it as, rather than deploying geophone arrays, you're just deploying lots of nodes and you're recording all of that information. And when you get it into the processing shop, you can do everything that you want. You can merge that data into groups, to be able to filter out things. You can keep it as raw data. People have shied away from it, I think, in the past because they're worried about the density of data and how do you handle that. But computing power is becoming so cheap and accessible these days that you don't have to worry about it. And I think as AI technology comes in, the ability to be able to analyze very, very large data sets is going to become more cost effective, is going to become quicker. So as you look forward, why do you want to merge data in the field when you can record every single point and, analyze it at a later stage? So for me, it's just thinking, don't think of it as a node versus a cable, just think of it as geophone points and how many do you want? I think we mentioned about the real-time QC bit as well. That's always been a holdback, and that's why people wanted to see it. Again, real-time QC, and I remember this in Russia, why do you really want it? Well, technology is still unreliable. We don't know whether that shot is going to work, whether that cable system is going to record it. So therefore, before we move on, we want to do it. I remember the first iPhones. Why did you back up an iPhone? It's because they were always crashing. Now you take it for granted that everything is going to work for infinitum. So why do you really want real-time QC?
Yeah, it's a debate I often have, as you can imagine. And I don't often get to a good reason of why someone wants the data. It's more that's what we're used to, or we were used to with cable systems. So we now want it with nodes. I guess one last question. So across your career, what have been the biggest learnings in survey design you'd share?
Yeah, as I look back on my career, most of it has been in the offshore environment. And I was involved in some of the early 3Ds in the North Sea and the use of high density seismic offshore Vietnam when we had to do it for risk analysis following some well control incidents. That high data quality and that ability to be able to acquire denser, wider azimuth surveys was really driving exploration results and the ability to turn around projects much quicker. So we've achieved that offshore. The challenge is, can you achieve it onshore? And I think we're now at that next stage where we can. That will not only open up new areas or new opportunities onshore, because you can acquire data where you couldn't before. You can do it much, much quicker. And, I think that will always lead to much better results. So for me, it's not so much survey design. It's the ability to be able to acquire data and to be able to use it. And once you can acquire data, you want to be able to do that in a much denser way, much wider azimuth, much longer offset that you can do, or the advanced geophysics that has really driven the mantra that I live with in BP of no dry holes. And you can translate that into any industry. You don't want to drill a well for mineral lobe and miss it. You don't want to drill a well for a geothermal target and find that you don't even find the aquifer if you're looking for hot water. So it's always not just been about the image for me. It's being able to get a data set that allows you to do a lot of the quantitative geophysics, the reservoir characterization that you need to do now to make yourselves more successful.
Okay, thank you. That's the end of my questions. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before we close out? Anything we didn't get to which is important?
No, I think, you said that we've been involved with this for a long time, 9 years or whatever it is. And I think it's just been a fantastic opportunity to see something that can transform not just the oil and gas industry, but every industry that you're now touching. Universities being able to do a lot more things. I can remember my early days in Newcastle where, seismic for us was a plate and a simple sensor. Now you've got these mini systems, and you're really opening up the opportunities, I think, for the next generation of geophysicists or explorers who are going to be able to visualize the subsurface in a much better way, do it cheaply, do it more efficiently. I'm just really pleased, when I look back at that first letter I got from Mr. Dudley, it said, do you think Rosneft would like to participate in this? And you could see how it could transform. And it was just a really great opportunity to be able to share your journey from the collaboration bit to the creation of STRYDE. And now where STRYDE is in a very successful place. So thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for the opportunity for this talk and share my views, and wish you luck for the future.
Yeah, and thank you for being part of that journey. It's been, for me, it's been even longer. It's been 12 years. So thank God it is going well. But it's been It's been fascinating, hasn't it? So thank you very much for being part of that. And it's been great talking to you. So thank you for today. This is our last episode for 2025. So wanted to say a big thank you to everyone listening and watching, and thank you for supporting the series since we launched earlier this year. We will carry on next year. We'll get some fantastic guests along. It's been a great year for Stride, but I never feel satisfied. I think next year will be even better. And there's an exciting 2026 ahead of us. But everyone listening who has time off in December, get a good rest and come back ready for a big year next year. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. Look forward to continuing the journey.
Me too.